"Don't wait up," she said, standing by the mirror with her hair twisted up in a clip I'd never seen before. "I won't," I lied. That night, I followed a version of my wife I hadn't met before. She wore her confidence like a second skin, walked into the hotel like it belonged to her, and disappeared behind the ballroom doors without a second glance. I didn't plan to go in. I just wanted to see what these events actually were. The no spouses allowed, too boring for you, work only type of nights that always ended in an Uber ride home at 2:17 a.m. with smudged lipstick and the scent of whiskey she doesn't drink. But then I saw the man. He was leaning against the valet desk outside, flipping his car keys, checking his watch, sharp suit, overgelled hair, smile like a promise he never keeps. When she arrived, she didn't say hello like a coworker. She touched his chest with the back of her hand. Soft, slow, like muscle memory. I entered the building 30 seconds later, pretending to be on a phone call. My palms were already sweating, my pulse running a full marathon. The ballroom was gilded, glowing. I slipped in through the rear service hall using a staff door left ajar. The music wasn't loud, but the laughter was. Real laughter. Rich people laughter. I saw her across the room, and then I heard her voice. "Grayson." Her voice dropped a full octave when she said his name. I've heard that tone before, but never directed at me. She leaned in. He whispered something in her ear. Her fingers slid along the rim of her glass. She tilted her head and laughed. I felt it in my stomach. That primal sting of being replaced. And yet, none of that prepared me for what happened when the projector screen came down. The presentation wasn't about products. It wasn't about quarterly wins. It was something else. Something private. I don't know how she thought I'd never see it. But there, in the slideshow that followed, buried between charts and fake graphs, was a picture of our bedroom, taken from an angle I never stood at. And then a second photo. This one was worse. She was in it. And she wasn't alone. I didn't even notice myself moving closer to the screen. The air had gotten colder, or maybe that was just me shaking. The moment that first photo appeared, the one of our bedroom, I swear my knees buckled just slightly. I caught myself on the edge of the catering table and accidentally knocked a spoon into one of the trays. A man beside me gave a quick glance, but I pretended to sneeze. No one paid attention. They were too busy watching the show. And it was a show? The presentation kept rolling like nothing was wrong. First, that angled photo of our bedroom. Dim lighting, candles on the dresser, sheets slightly pulled back. It wasn't graphic, but it was intimate. Personal. Not the kind of image you'd accidentally slip into a PowerPoint about marketing trends. But what came next drained every ounce of warmth from my body. The next slide showed Mallory. Hair messy, sweater slipping off one shoulder, sitting on the edge of that same bed. She was laughing. Unaware, candid, and next to her, only partly in frame, was a man's arm resting behind her back. Same suit I saw earlier. Grayson. It all happened so fast, but it was slow enough to burn itself into my memory. Then came the chart. A literal chart. The title read, Client Loyalty, a Personal Approach. The bullet points underneath were filled with double meanings. Things like, build trust through intimacy. Invest fully, emotionally and otherwise. Repeat interactions for deeper satisfaction. People chuckled. One woman clapped. And my wife stood at the front of the room, laughing along, like it was all one big inside joke. Like the whole thing was part of the pitch. Just a bit. I wanted to scream. Or cry. Or throw a chair through the projector. But I couldn't even move. My hands were glued to my sides, trembling. I wasn't just watching her cheat on me. I was watching her turn it into a presentation. And the room, her coworkers, her friends, her boss, they were all in on it. Maybe not literally, but emotionally. They knew. They saw. And they still raised their glasses and laughed, and called her a genius. It was like walking in on your wife with another man and realizing they're filming it for a TED Talk. When the lights came back up, and everyone clapped politely, I slipped away to the hallway, practically gasping for air. I ducked into the men's restroom and sat in the last stall with my head against the metal door. The room smelled like expensive soap and fake fig trees, but I couldn't breathe. I texted her. Just 2 words. I saw. She didn't reply. But 10 seconds later, the restroom door creaked open. Heels. Slow steps. Then a voice I knew all too well. Daryl? We need to talk. I didn't answer. Not yet. Because I didn't come here just to watch. I came here to find out everything. And she had no idea how far I was willing to go. I stayed in that stall longer than I should have. Not because I was hiding, at least not entirely, but because I needed to rehearse the version of me I'd be when I walked back out. I couldn't be the Daryl who let things go, the guy who forgave before even hearing the full lie. I couldn't be the whimpering, apologizing husband who thought, maybe I misunderstood, just because she smiled the way she used to. I had to be colder than I'd ever been. Calculated. Quiet. Dangerous. The heels outside had stopped pacing. I flushed the toilet to signal the end of my retreat. I stepped out, and there she was, Mallory, standing with her arms crossed, her expression tight but unreadable. She wasn't crying. She didn't look guilty. She looked annoyed. "You're not supposed to be here," she said, as if I had wandered into her yoga class by mistake. I didn't answer. I stared at her like I was trying to read subtitles only I could see. "Daryl, don't be dramatic. It was a joke. The photos were a joke. Grayson helped me stage it. We were trying to make a boring presentation fun. You know how corporate is." She reached into her clutch and pulled out her phone. Scrolled. Turned it toward me. There were more photos. Mallory posing in our bedroom, laughing, sipping wine, wearing the same outfit from the slideshow. And yes, Grayson was in them. Sometimes next to her. Sometimes behind her. Sometimes closer than that. She scrolled faster, trying to create a blur of innocence to overwrite what I had seen. But none of it explained why she RSVP'd with me and then told me not to come. None of it explained the touch on his chest. The whisper. The voice that dropped when she said his name. "It's not what you think," she said again, softer now. "But if you're going to act like this, maybe you should go home." I leaned in, closer than I had in months. Not to intimidate her, but to see if I could still smell her. If she still smelled like my Mallory. She didn't. I turned without another word and walked out of the restroom. She didn't follow. I didn't go home. Instead, I went back to the ballroom, this time walking confidently, like I belonged. I moved around the edges of the crowd, avoiding her line of sight. The room had shifted into late-night mode. Loosened ties, shoes kicked off under chairs, laughter slurred at the corners. That's when I saw Grayson again. Alone now, by the bar. I approached him, calmly, casually. "Hell of a presentation," I said. He glanced at me sideways, raised his glass. "Thanks. You with Mallory's team?" "I'm with Mallory." His smile faltered. Oh damn. You're Daryl." He said it like he was meeting the ghost of a man he had only heard rumors about. Like I was a myth he'd hoped never to see walk into a room. "I thought you weren't supposed to be here?" I finished for him. "Yeah. Seems like that's the theme tonight." He cleared his throat, then looked down at his drink. "Look, man, it's not what you think." There it was again. The lie people say when the truth is too ugly for their vocabulary. "Here's the thing," I said, still calm. "I don't think anything. I know exactly what I saw, but I'm more interested in what I didn't see." He looked up. "The cameras," I continued. "You all used a tripod for those joke photos, right?" His silence confirmed it. "And where's the footage?" I asked. "Because I know how these nights work. You don't just take stills. Especially not in my house." Grayson opened his mouth to respond, but I didn't give him the chance. "You crossed a line, man. And I'm not the forgiving type." I walked away before he could speak, my heart hammering like a fist against a locked door. But it wasn't over. Because on my way out, tucked behind the concierge desk, I saw a guest list. A physical printout. Names. Companies. Titles. And one name stood out. Not mine. Hers. But not as an employee. Not as a speaker. It listed her as Mallory Sykes, private consultant, intimate psychology marketing division. Oralux Black Label. Invitation-only clients. My wife didn't just work for the company. She worked in the part of it she never told me existed. And I had no idea who the hell I was married to anymore. I didn't sleep that night. Not a single minute. I drove home, sat on the couch in the dark, and just stared. Not at the TV. Not at my phone. I just stared at the wall like it owed me answers. Every once in a while, I'd glance at the clock and wonder if she was coming home. She didn't. No calls. No texts. Nothing. She'd vanished into the folds of that expensive hotel and left me sitting in a silence so loud it made my ears ring. At 6:17 a.m., I finally stood up. I walked to the kitchen and opened the junk drawer where we kept our important documents. The place normal couples keep takeout menus, expired coupons, and maybe one or two unpaid parking tickets. Mallory kept hers in a different way. She was organized, obsessive almost. Every file had a color code, every category its own tab. That's where I found it. A slim black envelope tucked inside a manila folder labeled Work, Conf. The card inside was thick, matte black, with a silver foil logo I recognized immediately, Oralux. But the lettering below the logo was different. Smaller. Embossed. It read, Black Label Access. Tier 3 only. Non-transferable. Eyes only. I shouldn't have opened it. But the kind of man I used to be, the one who respected boundaries, wasn't sitting on that couch anymore. Inside was a brief outline, written in clinical, almost academic language. It described something called intimacy resonance modeling, a pilot program designed for elite clients who needed more than conventional marketing. Apparently, Oralux had developed a psychologically immersive environment where consultants were paired with high-profile executives to simulate emotional bonds and extract authentic behavioral data. Translation: my wife was getting paid to play the perfect partner, romantic, physical, emotional, for men who signed contracts waiving moral and social liability. It was legal, sanitized, sterile on paper, but not to me. She had taken our home, our bed, our trust, and turned it into a lab experiment for emotional manipulation. That slideshow? That wasn't just a joke. It was a demo. She was the product. I sat on the floor for a long time, holding that card like it was radioactive. I kept picturing her laugh, how easy it was for her to sell it to them, how easily she turned love into leverage. When the garage door finally rumbled open just before 9 a.m., I didn't even move. She walked in humming, carrying her heels in one hand, hair messy, eyeliner slightly smeared, and had the audacity to say, "Morning, babe. Didn't expect you to be up." I stood. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I just handed her the card. She froze. Her smile dropped instantly, replaced with a flicker of something rare for Mallory, fear. "Where did you find this?" she asked, almost in a whisper. "You left it next to your conscience," I said flatly. "Didn't take much digging." She opened her mouth, then closed it. No excuses this time. "No, it's not what it looks like." Just silence. I waited. She sat on the bar stool and looked down at the tile. Then finally, she said, "You were never supposed to see that." My throat tightened. "Then what was I supposed to see, Mallory?" I asked. "The carefully curated version of you that comes home and kisses me on the cheek after rehearsing intimacy with strangers for profit?" Her eyes welled up. "Not tears. Not yet. Just pressure. It's not about them," she said. "It's about control. Power. I'm good at it. I'm the best, actually. Do you know what it's like to walk into a room full of men who think they run the world and make them fall apart with just your voice?" I didn't answer. I didn't need to, because everything I feared was true, and somehow, it still wasn't the worst part. That came a moment later, when she reached into her purse, pulled out another folder, white this time, and handed it to me like it was a recipe book. "What's this?" I asked, already knowing I wouldn't like the answer. "It's your profile," she said quietly. "From last year. You were part of the early study." I stared at her, and she stared back, and my world collapsed all over again. I didn't open the folder right away. For a few moments, I just held it, like it might bite me. Mallory watched, silent, her nails tapping rhythmically on the marble counter like she was keeping time with the seconds of our marriage breaking apart. I wanted to throw it in her face, scream, curse, rip the thing to pieces. But I didn't. My anger wasn't explosive anymore. It was slow, cold, like an iceberg under the surface, dragging ships down with no splash. When I finally opened the folder, the first thing I saw was my name. Daryl Sykes. Date of birth, education, occupation, all listed in neat, sterile print. It looked like a psychological assessment report. Clinical. Precise. Stripped of humanity. Below that were entire sections analyzing my emotional dependency patterns, microreaction vulnerabilities, linguistic compliance triggers, and self-worth calibration markers. I didn't know what half of it meant, but I didn't have to. I could feel what it meant. Someone had taken me, my habits, my fears, my love, and dissected it like a frog on a cold tray under fluorescent lights. It got worse. There were transcripts, verbatim logs of conversations I'd had with Mallory during the first year of our marriage. I recognized my own words. Jokes I'd made. Apologies. Insecurities I'd whispered in the dark after too much wine. She had recorded them. Not once. Not secretly. systematically. For research, Daryl exhibits classic anxious attachment behavior, shows heightened conflict avoidance and a tendency to prioritize perceived partner needs over personal boundaries. High subject pliability when intimacy is threatened. Excellent candidate for low-resistance rapport modeling. That sentence was highlighted. You made me part of a ing experiment. I finally said, voice trembling, not from rage, but from the realization that I had never been a husband in her eyes. I'd been a variable, a data point. Mallory stood up and moved toward me, slowly, like I was an injured animal that might still bite. I didn't know I'd be assigned to you, she said. You were in the beta program. Random pairings. At first, it was just feedback. Little tests. Body language. Tone. But then, I fell in love with you, Daryl. I did. That part wasn't the study. I stepped back. You don't fall in love with your lab rat. I snapped. You feed it, observe it, log it. She reached out, but I pulled away. You don't understand what it meant, she said. You weren't supposed to. That's how the control worked. The study needed authenticity. Real reactions. If you knew, the data would have been useless. But the feelings, my feelings, those were real. I let out a short, bitter laugh. How convenient. The more I read, the sicker I felt. I flipped the pages rapidly, landing on one that made my fingers go numb. Subject unaware of manipulation efforts during key emotional decision points. Phase 2 recommended for potential escalation. Controlled betrayal scenario to test recovery and forgiveness elasticity. What the hell is Phase 2? I asked, throat dry. She hesitated, looked at the floor, and then she whispered, the Gala. The silence after that could have cracked glass. All this time, I thought I'd caught her cheating. That was the surface, the decoy, the show she needed me to see. The betrayal wasn't real. It was fabricated, manufactured, designed. They had wanted to test how much emotional damage a subject could take before breaking, before leaving, before losing trust entirely. I wasn't watching her fall for someone else at that event. I was watching a calibrated collapse, crafted just for me. I wasn't even heartbroken anymore. I was deconstructed. Mallory walked to the sink, poured herself a glass of water, and stared out the window like she was the one who needed space. They offered me a promotion if I completed Phase 2 with high scores, she said quietly. I declined. I didn't think you'd find out. I didn't want to hurt you. You didn't want to hurt me? I repeated, laughing now, full-blown, unhinged laughter. You filed my reactions under pliability metrics. You gave strangers access to my fears like they were items in a vending machine. And you didn't want to hurt me? She flinched. I dropped the folder on the floor. Pages scattered like broken glass. You said you fell in love with me, I said. So tell me, Mallory, was there ever a single day, a single night, when I wasn't just a goddamn spreadsheet to you? She didn't answer, which, of course, was all the answer I needed. But this wasn't over. Because if I was a subject in her experiment, then I still had data to collect. And I was going to start my own study, one she wouldn't see coming. I didn't leave the house that morning. I didn't pack a bag. I didn't storm off in cinematic heartbreak like some character in a Nicholas Sparks novel. Instead, I sat back down at the kitchen table, picked up the folder I'd thrown to the floor, and began reading it cover to cover. This time as someone who understood exactly what it was. Not a betrayal. Not even a report. It was a manual on how to break me. Mallory had gone upstairs. I could hear the shower running. Could almost picture her behind the glass, scrubbing the night off her skin like it would wash away the lies. But the lies didn't live on her skin. They lived in her mind. In her ability to compartmentalize and justify. To treat a human being, her husband, as a measured reaction system. The further I got into the folder, the more disturbing it became. Diagrams, flowcharts, scripts, predicted behavioral responses. One section documented the emotional outcomes from specific triggers, many of which I remembered vividly. The night I told her about my father walking out when I was 8, logged under Attachment Vulnerability Trigger Test Number 3. The first time I cried in front of her. Subject B07 exhibits accelerated emotional dependency in response to female-initiated comfort. B07. That was me. I wasn't even a name. I was Subject B07. There were timelines and coded messages she had allegedly sent to her supervisor for reporting purposes. One update, dated 9 months into our marriage, read, Subject responded positively to subtle withdrawal of affection, followed by reinstated validation. Trust deepening. Subject unaware. Proceeding with long-term escalation phase. She built me up just to slowly erode my foundation, piece by piece, smile by smile. I had thought our struggles were natural, human. I believed every tear, every fight, every makeup session under dim bedroom lights. But now, knowing it was part of a design, I couldn't tell which memories were real and which were engineered. What disturbed me most wasn't just what was in the folder, but what wasn't. There were blank pages at the end, dozens of them, labeled post-escalation tracking. They were meant to be filled in after the gala, after I broke, after I begged or left or lashed out. She was supposed to monitor me like a lab animal after a final injection, but she hadn't written anything yet, because I hadn't reacted the way they predicted, and that, somehow, gave me more power than I had felt in years. By the time she came downstairs, hair wrapped in a towel, bathrobe cinched, mascara washed away, I was already back in my seat at the table, calm, waiting. She looked at me like I was an unsolved equation, like the subject had breached containment. "You're still here?" she asked carefully. "I've got questions," I said, "and you're going to answer all of them." She hesitated. "I already told you everything. You told me what you think I can handle. That's not the same." Mallory exhaled and sat down across from me. For the first time, she looked small, not powerful, not composed, just a woman sitting in front of a man she couldn't quite read anymore. "Who else knew?" I asked. Her eyes flicked to the window, then back to me. "Only my handler. The Black Label program is." "Who else?" She swallowed. "Grayson, and one other. A field analyst. Name's Nia." "And are they watching now?" I asked. She didn't answer. "I need access to everything," I continued. "Every recording, every report, every name tied to this program." She blinked. "Daryl, that's not how it works." "No," I interrupted. "That's how it worked when I was the experiment. But the control's broken, Mallory. You've lost it. And now, you're going to tell me how deep this goes, or I swear I'll burn everything down. Your job, the Black Label program, your entire company." She looked terrified, and not just of me, of what I might uncover, of what they might do if I did. "Daryl," she said, lowering her voice, "if you push this, you don't know who you're messing with. These aren't just executives and startups. Some of the clients, they're powerful, people with reach. If you start poking around, you'll be marked. They'll erase you. I'm serious." I leaned in. "Then maybe it's time they learned what happens when a subject starts running their own experiment." I stood, took the folder with me, and walked out the door. I didn't pack a bag, didn't even grab my keys. I just started walking, the morning sun blinding but warm on my skin, and for the first time in a long time, I wasn't lost. I was angry. I wasn't going to run. I was going to investigate. I was going to expose. Because if Mallory thought I was pliable, she'd forgotten one thing. Even lab rats learn where the poison is. The thing about being betrayed in a way that turns your life into data is that you start seeing everything differently. You stop looking at people as people. You start scanning for motives, for patterns, for the tiny slips in their mask. The cashier who avoids eye contact. The neighbor who waves too enthusiastically. The old friend who suddenly starts texting again. You wonder if they're real, or if you're just still being watched. I walked for hours that morning. I didn't really have a destination in mind, but I ended up at the only place that still felt outside of her world, my brother's apartment on the east side. Jeremy and I hadn't spoken much over the past year, mostly because he never liked Mallory. Thought she was manufactured. His words. Not cold, not fake, manufactured. I guess now I owed him an apology for ever doubting that instinct. He opened the door half asleep in a hoodie and gym shorts, saw the look on my face, and just stepped aside without a word. I dropped the folder on his kitchen table. Said nothing. Let him read. I watched his face morph from confusion to disbelief to a kind of quiet, simmering horror. "Dude," he finally said, flipping through the pages, what the hell even is this?" "I think," I said, still staring blankly ahead, "this is what they use instead of divorce lawyers." He didn't laugh. No one laughed. Not anymore. We spent the next 2 hours researching Oralux and the Black Label division, but their website didn't mention anything beyond the polished surface. Marketing, branding, B2B strategy. Their listed leadership team had generic LinkedIn profiles, and the only reference to Black Label was a password-locked client portal, completely inaccessible without internal clearance. So I did what desperate men do. I made a call. Not to Mallory. To Finley, my old college roommate, the same guy who had gotten me into the Gala pretending to be part of the security crew. He picked up on the second ring, voice groggy but alert. "Daryl? You good, man? That thing with the suit, did it blow up or what?" "Finn, I need access. Not to the ballroom. To the real stuff. To whatever's behind the NDA they made you sign." There was silence on the line. "Jesus, you found out." "Yeah," I said. "And I need to meet whoever handles her. Whoever runs this operation. I need to know who watched my life from behind a screen and labeled it Subject B07. He cursed under his breath. "You don't want that smoke, D. You really don't. I already have it. I'm breathing it in every second I sit still." Another pause. Then he whispered something that gave me chills. "There's one name. She never gave me hers, but everyone calls her the handler. Real name might be Nia Carson. Ex-behavioral scientist. Stanford. Then she vanished from the public world about 6 years ago. I saw her once. Black blazer. Red pin. No ID badge. When she walks into a room, even the execs shut up." "Where is she?" He hesitated. "She used to run weekly check-ins at this off-grid property north of Westvale. Not on any maps. GPS cuts out halfway there. They call it the Glass House." I ended the call 10 minutes later and left Jeremy's place with the folder in one hand and a burner phone in the other. That night, I didn't sleep. I drove. The road to Westvale turned from pavement to gravel, then to something barely resembling a road at all. By the time I reached the edge of the tree line, the GPS died exactly like Finley said. I parked the car behind a thicket and continued on foot, heart pounding, flashlight flickering against the trees. The glass house wasn't a metaphor. It was a real house. Modern, boxy, minimalist. Every wall was floor-to-ceiling glass, mirrored on the outside. Like a prism dropped into the middle of the forest. There were no guards. No fences. Just silence. I approached slowly, expecting cameras or alarms. Nothing. I reached the front step and raised my hand to knock, but the door opened before I touched it. She was already standing there. A woman in her late 40s, hair tied back, eyes sharp and unblinking. Dressed in black slacks and a blouse with no logos, no color, no warmth. "You shouldn't be here," she said. I didn't flinch. "I'm not leaving until I get answers." She looked at me for a long moment, then stepped aside. "Then come in, Subject B07. Let's see how much of your identity still belongs to you." And with that, I walked into the house where my life had been rewritten. The glass house was cold inside. Not temperature-wise. The air was climate-controlled, purified, probably infused with something subtle to make you stay calm. But emotionally, it was sterile. Every chair looked like it had never been sat in. Every object looked like it had been placed with tweezers. The woman, Nia, the handler, walked ahead without asking if I'd follow. I did. Past a living room that looked like a high-end waiting area, past bookshelves with no titles on the spines, into what looked like a conference room dressed as a therapy office. 2 chairs, a table, a carafe of water, one screen, mounted to the wall, black and lifeless. She gestured for me to sit. "I won't ask how you found me," she said. "You've clearly proven resourceful. But I will ask what you want. Revenge? Exposure? Closure?" "I want you to delete the file," I said. "Everything. My profile. My data. All of it. Gone. No backups. No copies. I want every trace of Subject B07 wiped from your system." She didn't blink. "And if I don't, I'll make noise," I said. "The kind your clients don't like. I've already sent partial scans of the folder to 3 journalists. No names yet. But if anything happens to me, if I go quiet, disappear, or get buried under legal threats, those files go live." Her mouth twitched. A barely perceptible smirk. "You planned ahead. I learned from the best." She leaned back, studying me like a chessboard. Then, surprisingly, she nodded. Stood up, walked to a terminal on the wall behind her, tapped in a series of commands. Lines of text flickered on the screen. "Subject B07, she said, almost robotically. "Profile access confirmed. Data purge requested by subject. Consent override granted." A final prompt appeared. She turned the screen toward me. "Press delete. Your life's yours again." I didn't hesitate. I tapped the button. The screen blinked. Files vanished line by line. Logs, audio, reports, images. Every trace of the man she had studied for years evaporated into digital ash. When it was done, she powered off the terminal. "Your wife will retain her memories," she said, "but the program won't." "Mallory's not my wife anymore," I replied, standing up. "She's just a chapter." The walk out of the glass house felt lighter than the walk in. The air tasted different. For the first time in months, I wasn't carrying questions like weights around my neck. I was just breathing. A week later, I filed for divorce. Mallory didn't contest it. She didn't cry. She didn't beg. She just signed the papers, wished me well, and said, "I guess you were never meant to be a subject." "No," I told her. "I was meant to be a person. You just forgot." I moved out of the city, took a job at a smaller firm, bought a beat-up cabin near a lake, and started waking up with the sun instead of anxiety. I planted herbs, learned how to fix leaks, learned how to sit still again. Some nights I still think about it. The experiment, the betrayal, the quiet erasure of everything I believed was real. But then I look around at the silence of the trees and the stillness of the water, and I remember. I survived it. Not as Subject B07, not as a victim, but as a man who chose himself. And that, to me, was the most radical outcome they never predicted.